Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast, and today it is Christmas. Happy holidays. And
Happy
you know it's a
holidays.
great Christmas movie? Die Hard. But you know it's another great Christmas movie? Die Hard 2. This is the Spoiler Alert podcast. I'm Nate. This is Dakota. And what were your first impressions on Die Hard 2, Dakota?
It's a really good sequel. You wouldn't know it by its subtitle, which usually gets cut out of promotional materials. Die Harder. It's a really solid sequel. Die Hard's kind of weird in that way. I'm trying to think of any other franchise that is pretty consistently good. I mean, in terms of its sequels. With a Vengeance, I think is almost as good as the first Die Hard. I know that's not maybe the most popular. I have no idea why.
I think
I love With
a Vengeance is better than Die Hard 2, to be honest.
I do too, but I mean, it's not quite the first Die Hard, but I just love it as its own thing. I mean, I think it's a really solid sequel. But and Live Free or Die Hard is, it's okay. It's not bad. It just, maybe inching a little closer to mediocrity than A Good Day to Die Hard is just shit. So, there's a clear, it just fell at 90 fucking degrees with Good Day to Die Hard. But Die Hard 2, though, I really like, and I think I was maybe a bit too critical. It's not nearly as good as the first Die Hard, but it's actually a really solid sequel. I think it's a good movie on its own. I guess to really quickly just get the general complaints out of the way, it's maybe in some ways it's too similar to the first movie. I mean, which that's always the tough balance, giving the audience more of what they like, but just by virtue of doing the same thing twice, it's always going to be a bit diluted, because I mean, it's like the first bite out of a burger or something, the next one's probably never going to be as good. So you kind of have to top it. It has to be better in some way. And I don't know if Die Hard 2 really is. That's kind of the problem of sequels, but you do want to give people more. You don't want to switch things up too much, and I think Die Hard 2 is probably a pretty good example of how you do that. You give them more of the same. You don't change it up too much. The other complaint would be contrivances. There are too many people showing up in the same place at the same time. And the movie does kind of acknowledge it a bit, but acknowledging it isn't quite the same as, working out that problem in the writing, So, but there is, I think, probably a famous line where, where later in the film, where in Die Hard 2, where he's like, McClane, you're the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's like, story of my life, I think that's kind of a problem that a lot of franchises run into. It's like, what are the odds of the same? We talked about it with Alien, what are the odds of the same thing happening to the same character over and over and over, before the illusion's kind of shattered? You kind of feel that a bit with even Die Hard 2. What are the odds that McClane would find himself in this position? And again, those are, I guess, my general complaints. Other than that, though, it's, I think, a really solid action film.
I definitely liked Die Hard 2. I think Die Hard with Vengeance is partially better because they do change the formula a little bit. It becomes more of a mind game.
Yeah, I think they're good to watch. I like, as far as how you do a sequel, Die Hard 2 is an example of how you give the audience more of the same. Die Hard with a Vengeance is how you kind of switch things up, but still retain, the basic elements.
I just always think that secondary option there is the best one.
You can take it too far really easily, and that's the thing. And then I think people feel really betrayed and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Some risks do definitely pan out, a lot of them do. And then you have something great on your hands, but you do have people that just come in, they don't fundamentally understand it, and they just kind of just come in and wipe their ass with it and then walk away, well, like the guy who did A Good Day to Die Hard and single-handedly tanked the whole franchise at the very end. Up until that point, the franchise had a pretty solid record, and he didn't get it. He just made a shitty action movie like any of his others. It's indistinguishable. The editing's horrible. It's just crap, So I don't know what exactly the solution is. Some balance, I mean, in a perfect world, between more of the same, but just new enough, see into the distance and stretch that out perfectly. But studios are very short-sighted, so that never happens. It's, they don't really play the long game with their franchises, It's just, sure, this one's going to be bigger, better, bigger explosions, and, that's it. And if it doesn't, because, I think with a Vengeance, didn't do as well as Die Hard 2, and then there's that huge hiatus between that and Live Free or Die Hard. because it made less than Die Hard 2, but it cost more to make. So, and then we didn't get another Die Hard till like 2007 with Live Free or Die Hard. So
I'd like to encourage everybody to hit the like button, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, follow on Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify, follow us on YouTube, and anywhere else where podcasts are found applies as well. So the film begins with John McClane getting his car towed by this asshole cop in DC.
Vito.
The very next scene is this like super cop ninja looking guy practicing like karate moves, basically.
Yeah, he's going all like Apocalypse Now in front of the, he's like ass naked and yeah, I don't,
yes,
but less drunk.
Naked in front of a mirror doing kind of some yoga pose and kind of fighting looking stuff.
I don't know, I don't know. I don't watch UFC. Well, I'm not one of those people I could like tell you. I know Krav Maga, but he's doing some shit. I don't know the names. I don't know the form or anything like that. But yeah. And then the actor, I recognize him. I don't know his name, but I know like Frank Darabont casts him.
His name is actually William Sadler.
Well, so Darabont likes him. I mean, I'll trust that.
And then another establishing scene we get right away is that John McClane's wife, Holly, is on an airplane and also happens to be on the same airplane with the same newsman from Die Hard, Thornburg.
Right. So it'd probably be, again, kind of the first contrivance, like what are the odds? And, so there's a lot of that in this movie. I mean, I guess,
and there's a lot of weird messages about the media is like one of the bigger themes in this movie, as it seems. And it was,
it probably was in Die Hard 1. And
it was a little bit of that in Die Hard 1. It was a little bit.
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, well, with the Thornburg character and just kind of sensationalist media and whatever. Yeah. I think they lean into that a bit more, but I think it's just part of the Die Hard DNA. It's almost become like a running gag too, like the video game series Mass Effect. Like throughout all 3 games, you can punch a reporter in the face. Like that's an option. It's like this kind of like inside joke. Like so that's kind of the Die Hard thing here. Is like in the first one he gets punched, in the second he gets tased. I don't think they pick up the media thing with a vengeance, but and kind of like you said, mixed messages. I thought they're going to be a bit more charitable to the media from memory, but they're really not till the very end where she kind of has her, But
there's like one newswoman that he was kind of decent to.
Not really. I mean, it starts off with like "fuck you" in the elevator, right? I mean, so
is like. But it is kind of weird though, because like apparently like he had like a Nightline or Dateline basically like interview, so he was soaking up the limelight a little bit. McClane, you're just kind of being a dick to local reporters, even though that one is a pretty big asshole.
Okay, so in that scene, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but that's where I thought like, okay, they've both been kicked out of the same room for seeing that the people running the show are completely incompetent, right? And it's like, shut the fuck up, get out of here. They're both being shuffled into the elevator together. And that should have been like a bonding moment. Like, oh, wait, maybe you're not so bad. We're both trying to kind of do the same thing in a way. And instead it's like, no, fuck you, and he climbs out of the elevator through the vent or whatever. And I just thought, that was maybe a moment to show that there are some good reporters or something. And they don't really do that anywhere through the movie until you get that final scene at the end, where she's like, oh, we don't need to film this. This is a husband-wife moment. And I don't know. So I just felt they could have been a bit more nuanced or something, and switch things up a bit and offered a contrast, right? Because you have the asshole in the sky, but then you have the reporter down on the ground, and it almost seems redundant to have 2 of them who are both assholes, right? Just and then randomly the movie just decides at the end that like, well, she's not that bad. Like, but there's really nothing building to that.
Also, it's noted early on in the airplane scene that the old lady next to Holly has a taser in her bag.
Yeah, she's talking about how great technology is because Holly's calling John on a cell phone. Big fucking, well, technically 90. This is 1990, I think that this came out. But yeah, so like, but there's a technology would be another theme, is what I was trying to say, throughout the film. So And I think with having the old woman, it's like their way of, it's not even an age gap, being sort of a Luddite, because John just kind of chooses to not really try to adapt to newer technologies. Like, I don't know that there's anything really deep there, but it is a theme in the movie. So he's old school, classical, and yeah.
And then down on the ground, there's a suspicious looking crew of people, of like sanitation people or something, plumbers, going into an old church, and then they shoot the caretaker there. So that's suspicious, and we figure out that's where they set the headquarters. And then McClane sees a very suspicious like baggage transfer and suspicious looking dudes walking through the airport, and decides to follow them a little bit until a different cop stops him from doing so. And then that's when we first see the newswoman, and she's walking by and sees Sadler's character, who it's revealed that Sadler's character is named Colonel Stewart. So the newswoman tries to interview Sadler, and Sadler like brushes her off, and then McClane follows them. Sadler and his like suspicious crew of people follows them into like the conveyor belt room where they have a bunch of luggage going every which way. McClane almost arrests two of them, but then they shoot and run, and then it becomes a big chase. And then that chase climaxes in a scene that's like Temple of Doom, where they're going up the conveyor belt, and he like shoves his head in a roller, and then he even starts flapping just like he does in Temple of Doom. And then the newsman from the first movie, Thornburg, he is on the plane, and he apparently has a restraining order against Holly because Holly punched him, I think, at the end of the first movie. And then
because he had endangered their children through his sensationalist reporting or whatever.
That was, I remember explaining that was like literally against the law.
Right.
I don't know. They really do kind of paint the press in a bad light here, which the press is got its problems for sure. Sometimes it's more of a punching bag than I think it deserves, but sometimes there's important press people, but there's also people like this guy.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think this is coming out at the time where we start, like, obviously I didn't live for it, but from what I understand, this is kind of like the transition into sensationalist car chase news, probably happening around the 80s or the 90s. It's kind of a response to that.
I think they had like cops because they were like, because it's like, like the drug war continuing, you know what I mean? Like is part of it too, where like crime went up, and like I'm just saying the drug war thing because of like basically money put into police force. You know what I mean? Because like in the 60s we had a war going on, so that's where the media flocked. It flocked to the war. And then that went into the 70s. And then in the 80s, it was a crime war. So basically, police were the number one influence for like the 80s into the early 90s. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting. Oh, yeah, and that's definitely the theme of this movie, though, because I mean, you have some like South American despot or whatever who's also like a cartel leader or something, like I don't know. So there's drug money floating around. I think it's kind of the premise of this one. And obviously that just it kind of evokes really everything that the 80s were about. And then I think it wasn't really till the 90s that you started to have movies come out that were a bit more skeptical. Yeah, it seemed to kind of be the preoccupation of like early 90s action movies, was kind of taking a more cynical look at the guns blazing kind of attitude of a lot of 80s action movies,
even like the style of movie that would come out, that it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie and came in the 90s, which is like, Quentin Tarantino to be the first one to tell you he loves like a cheesy action movie, or a campy action movie. But at the same time, like he wanted to do things differently, you know what I mean? Like just the way things change all the time is what, it just one style kind of almost sort of decides what the next style is going to be sometimes.
I feel conflicted saying it because it contradicts what I usually say, that like something defined by being the opposite of something usually kind of just withers away, right? I mean, because like if the whole identity of something is like, okay, yes, like the Straw Dogs remake was that just shit. And however you feel about Peckinpah's original, and obviously a very controversial movie for understandable reasons, like people being upset by the movie, but the remake defined itself solely by undermining everything that made the original Straw Dogs Straw Dogs. I guess what I was going to say is like, I mean, Tarantino, I mean, was probably a response to the 80s movies. You talk about this a lot, where like people are just being gunned down. There's no sanctity of human life in the 80s action movies. Like they're just props to be shot down. And then I think you had like something like Reservoir Dogs come out, where it's like, I'm gonna fucking die here. You know, I mean, it's there's no dignity there. It's you know, it's very human. It's being shot really sucks. You know, and people are scared, and there's, you know, yeah. So
that's
I mean,
why I've always
basically
kind of felt that like I like the way Tarantino does violence, because it's either pretty damn realistic or sensationalist. So if you go over I'm okay with going over the top with gore, as well as being accurate. Both of those options I like more than like underdoing it. And then we get a cut to Colonel Stewart. He like forgives like one of his soldiers that like for like letting John McClane get away, and he's like, sure, but the next time you do it, he puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. He's like, but the next time it's going to be loaded or whatever.
Right, yeah, he controls with fear and everything, I guess, but like it's kind of mixed messages, right? Because like he comes back, he's like, well, the mission was a success, but we lost a man. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter as long as the mission was a success. So you think all would be well and fine, but then he pulls the gun on him anyway. Like the next time you fail, like you just said it was a fucking success. Like make it so. This is a guy who doesn't value his men, and so the loss of one doesn't matter. So okay, mission successful, right? Because that's the only thing that went wrong, was the guy died. But I guess he doesn't care about that. So why are you threatening this dude? I mean, there's not going to be anybody left at this rate. Like if this is the way he does shit.
And then this Officer Lorenzo is like the second in command, I believe, at the airport. He's played by the same guy that plays like the character in NYPD Blue, I think. He doesn't want to shut down the airport, even though McClane is asking him to. It's kind of wild in a post 9/11 America, how like the cops are like lackadaisical at an airport when there's like clear threats.
Yeah, that's the thing that's so funny though. Like if you look back on all of these like thrillers, it's like, well, because I mean, planes were being hijacked all the time. Half the Tom Clancy novels is like Rainbow Six, I can remember specifically, plane hijacking. Like they did happen, they just didn't fly them into fucking buildings, which it didn't end up happening like that. It was always just like, we have everybody on the plane, give us money and safe landing and shit, and we'll let everybody go, you know. And then just, I mean, so yeah, it's something that happened all the time, but I mean regularly. It just for some reason blew our minds when somebody finally weaponized the plane, you know, like, so, and that was 9/11.
I mean, yeah, it's just crazy to think how like lackadaisical you could be when you could go from having like 50 hostages to 1,000 hostages, you know, basically. Yeah. Like if you're a threat to run into a building. John McClane takes the guy who he rolled through the belt conveyor belt thing. He takes his fingerprints, faxes them over to Al Powell from Die Hard, the first one. So that's a nice callback. I kind of wish Powell was in more of it, but I also see how that's not possible because they're in DC.
I thought I remembered him being like kind of playing a support role through the film, and he doesn't. He just has that kind of one scene. I like that though, because if I remember, we talked about at the end of the first Die Hard. I think that I felt a little weird that he was sort of vindicated by picking up his gun at the end of the film, and the idea was that like he would go back to the streets. And I like that Die Hard 2 kind of disregards that. Like he quits while he's ahead. He killed a kid, but he's sort of vindicated by picking up his gun and using it to save lives. But he quits, and he still stays behind his desk.
Could he used a little more of him, to be honest.
But he's still being useful behind a desk, which I like. So it's showing, I mean, because he's playing a similar role to what he did in the first Die Hard, a support role.
It's more than a cameo, less than a supporting
but it's less
role.
than
Like
it's a single scene. But yeah,
yeah.
I wish there was more of Al, like you said. I thought there was, and there isn't. So
and now the bad guys are getting something set up. We don't quite know what, but they're fucking with shit. The newswoman tries to speak with McClane, but he kind of brushes her off, but isn't as nasty to her as like he is other press people. She's also not super nasty towards him.
We just say fuck off to her later in the elevator. So again,
yeah, it's just not quite as toxic as the other ones, which is interesting.
It's a friendly
apparently he was on like
maybe.
a Nightline episode or something. So I don't know.
Yeah, who was it that Lorenzo was like, I saw you on Night Live, and you weren't so hot,
you've been
right?
soaking it up, you douche.
Right.
So which he kind of had a point about.
Yeah, that's interesting that you point that out. I mean, I guess he didn't have to show, right? So
maybe McClane's just like a kind of an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you have the woman who does the faxes, like I said, hitting on him and whatever, and so, but he's like, I'm married, and so he does the right thing. But yeah, I think he enjoys it. He is basking a bit, but I don't think it's compromising him from doing the right thing ultimately,
And then McClane finally convinces like the head captain guy of like, so Lorenzo's boss, he convinces the captain that these fingerprints are from like this sketchy dude that's been officially dead for 3 years, so he's probably some kind of weird
fighting dirty wars in Honduras or something,
so he finally convinces the captain, and just as he does that, the runway shuts down. All the lights in the runways go down, and they lose communication with their planes because they cut like a bunch of power sources and a bunch of communication towers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then that lead terrorist calls, and this is Colonel Stewart, and he kind of explains everything that's going on, that they have all communication and they can forge any kind of communication they want. And eventually the airplanes are going to run out of fuel, which I'm like, there's got to be a nearer airport that they could all just land on.
No, but maybe you're right. Because it's like, because I remember somebody talks to John McClane's like, your wife's plane's going to go down in 90 minutes. I'm like, well, this is you're right. Like 90 minutes is probably enough time to get to another runway, Yeah, shit. Maybe that isn't quite as rock solid now that I think about it.
So then Lorenzo kicks McClane and the newswoman out of the control room, sends him down on an elevator. That's when he sneaks up through the elevator and is like, I've done this before. And then when they opened up the doors, McClane was gone, and he didn't have to deal with the security guards.
The plot is, I suppose we should get this out of the way. There is a South American despot funding himself through drug cartel stuff. Anyway, and like he's fighting actually against communism, the spread of communism in South America. So then you have a bunch of American special forces soldiers who have retired or gone mercenary, who believe that the United States is not taking enough of a hardline stance against the spread of communism in South America, which is probably what they were fighting against throughout the 80s, given the kind of track record of, so, and then you have this current Spec Ops unit that used to fight alongside or train under these rogue guys, which, makes a sort of sense to recruit those guys because they'd probably be the best equipped to fight the other guys.
One of the tower workers, the character's name is Leslie Barnes. He is running through with a team of soldiers and stuff, trying to get a generator or get the power or get the communications going somehow. But
yeah, I think it's a communications tower, but basically, I can't remember.
But McClane sees that on the way through, like he's looking at a map, and on the way it bottlenecks, and it's perfect setup for an ambush.
And then Robert Patrick, the T-1000 from Terminator 2. Yeah.
All those people were under the command of Major Grant. He's got the mercenaries that you were just explaining.
There was that line later on where McClane's like, because he's like, Grant's like, I taught him everything he knows. And McClane's like, well, yeah, but maybe he's picked up some new tricks in the interim, you know? And I would think there'd almost be a conflict of interest there that might be a bit suspect because these guys were all under your command at one point. But at the same time, who better to take them down than the guy that was their commander? So
McClane saves the airport official, who is Leslie Barnes. Another shootout ensues. We won't explain it in great detail because it's a good action scene. He topples over a construction stand and it lands directly on the guy's neck.
Yeah, some like scaffolding. Yeah, that looks pretty gruesome, you know, but yeah, so that dude's fucking dead.
And then the generator blows up. Like, so that's what, you know, Stewart and Grant had planned.
Yeah, I suppose they're spoiling it by saying that they're working in collusion because that's
you kind of pick it up though. Yeah, I kind of suspected. It's been a while since I've seen this movie all the way through, but I picked it up.
I didn't pick it up till about halfway through, and I was like, oh yeah, doesn't he betray? And then I started to remember some things. So it's not. Yeah, I can't be objective there because obviously I've seen the movie before. I can't tell you how surprising that was or wasn't. So
and then. Up in the air, Thornburg is listening on a radio and finds that frequency with like all of the, you know, the threats and whatnot. And yeah, so he gets onto the air traffic thing and is listening. And then Stewart tells a plane that it can land, and they adjust the readings by 200 feet. So everything's off by 200 feet when they're thinking about altitude, because they're landing blind, so they have to know that. So they're basically fucked. And then the plane crashes and everyone dies. And McClane, I think, at least momentarily, thinks it could have been Molly's plane or Holly's plane. But
I don't think it was that. I think it was just, actually, I wanted to say, like, I really appreciate that because like well, that's a scene that you have in the background. It's like, and you know, he actually weeps. I mean, it's like, and that's kind of, I'm glad that it wasn't just an explosion for this movie, you know, like, no, he was really trying to save these people. And like, yeah, you have like probably what, I mean, you know, quite a substantial loss of human life right there. And so he does start like sobbing. I thought that was really, again, it's one of those things about Die Hard that I think kind of separates it from its ilk of the time, you know, that like he reacts in quite a human way to the situation, you know. I don't think he thought it was Holly's plane. I think he just thought, you know, that a bunch of people are going to die and I'm going to try to stop it by wave, you know, and it just didn't work. So.
And then this part is when the platoon comes back into the fold and it's like, all right, we're taking over shit now. That platoon is led by Major Grant, who you explained had like dealings with Stewart in the past and were kind of allies of Stewart. Like he taught Stewart stuff, everything he knows, like you said. And they rewire a beacon to be a radio signal instead. So Barnes explains to everybody in all the airplanes of the situation, and that like to keep circling. But that's when I would be like, tell them to radio in for a different airport or something, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know
if they can even reach one at that point, because I mean, a lot of time
you are running out of time at that point, because I think at that point they were about 30 minutes or so.
Right, and they're on like their emergency fuel and shit. So I think that was the terrorist plan, because that comes up repeatedly in the first half, is that John McClane keeps catching on to like, okay, they were just trying to waste our time. So that by the time, so I think with the planes in the air at this point, maybe they could have gotten somewhere else, but by now, no, like landing on the strip is really their only hope. I don't know. That's never actually explained. So I don't mean to make excuses for the movie. I don't know how plausible it is or isn't, but maybe that's the idea, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And then the political prisoner, the guy that you were referring to, that's like the big head guy with a cartel, he kills a guard and then ends up killing
Who
a
was
pilot.
nice enough to light his cigar, which was in his inner pocket. I guess they didn't search him. I mean, see, no good deed goes unpunished.
But he kills
Yeah.
the guard and the pilot, and then tries to land the plane. He's getting directions from Stewart, and like, because like they're calling in, and he's like, I can barely do this. He doesn't seem like the best pilot. When he lands, he almost kills McClane, because McClane is getting up through this, like, what would you call it? Like almost like sewage cap. But
Yeah, manhole
like,
kind of, but it's not, it's like some kind of grating that he.
so he almost gets
lifts
cut
up.
in half by that, and then rolls away from that just in time. John then tries to capture the general out of the plane, but then bad guys show up and start shooting him up, and he has to like hide in the cockpit of the plane, and then they get the prisoner out, and then they start throwing grenades into the cockpit.
I was just say, I do know you do have some time with grenades. I forget the exact amount, but it does feel like he gets a few extra seconds to strap himself in.
I think it tends to be 5 to 6 seconds is what it's supposed to be.
And I mean, obviously you want to start lobbing those back, but he hears them say 3 grenades for each man, and they throw them all in. I'm like, that might be a lot of chucking, like, so, but anyways, it's one of actually definitely the standout scenes in the film, though. Yeah, he straps himself into the and hits the ejection launch, and right as it blows up, it's a really awesome scene. I mean, definitely, yeah, one of the standouts of the picture. I think the action gets a lot better after the halfway mark. Like, there are a lot of standout scenes in the second half. So, but yeah, that's definitely
that's one of the most famous scenes. And then Holly becomes suspicious of what the newspaper guy Thornburg is doing. So we see that briefly in the air.
I was thinking the whole subplot with Holly in Die Hard 2. I mean, she's likable and it's fun to follow her, and everything, but it's kind of ultimately pointless. I mean, she really only serves as a threat to McClane. I mean, in terms of like his wife might be killed, and that raises the stakes. Not a big deal, but I'm going to point it out. So
it makes sense. And then he's sneaking up on a bunch of the bad guys that are hanging out in that church, and he gets the platoon to come for backup. But turns out that the platoon is firing blanks, and so are the bad guys, because they're all in cahoots with each other. They switch their magazines from red to blue. Red means live rounds, blue means blanks. It looks like a close firefight and a scary firefight to John McClane for a little bit.
Yeah, I was also wondering somewhere in that snowmobile fight, like, I mean, that windshield was taking a lot of damage. It looked like they're actually shooting on them, though. I'm pretty sure that windshield's not gonna, resist bullets. One other minor complaint was like when they're all speeding off in their snowmobiles, one dude, McClane's like shooting at him, and one dude stops to like look. I mean, just keep going. So I don't know. That was kind of a convenient thing for the plot.
And then Thornburg calls the news station from the air and breaks the news, and now the news is all over the place.
Because he's intercepted the communications between they're messaging the planes like, here's what's up, there's been a terrorist
and that
situation.
has kind of caused chaos in the airport, because now everyone's freaking out, even though they had people calm, but now everyone's freaking out, which is a side effect that could happen.
Earlier in the film, they said they wanted to keep everybody calm, and so Thornburg fucks that up by breaking the news of what's going on.
And then Lorenzo, and okay, this scene is kind of extreme. John McClane goes up to Lorenzo to kind of explain that the platoon is against everybody by showing the thing about the blanks, and he does it by shooting an entire round of blanks at him.
Yeah, it's obviously it's deeply satisfying, because at this point that's what the audience wants to see, because Lorenzo's like one of the most I mean,
Annoying
he's
dick
so
bags.
incompetent that he could exist, but on the fringes of like, I mean, he's the most wildly incompetent person ever running the show. So anyway, so yeah, the audience might get a sick satisfaction out of that, but I was thinking, you're in the middle of a police station. Any number of dudes could take you down right now, McClane, from your little demonstration, you know? So yeah, because yeah, he holds that trigger down for like, you know, feels like a solid 5 fucking seconds, you know.
That is a weird scene that's like definitely funny, but definitely like on the fun dumb action movie side of things.
Right.
Um it isn't dumb though. It's pretty smart compared to at least some action movies.
Yeah, it's still, but it does move closer to Schwarzenegger territory, but it still keeps the Die Hard DNA by being realistic when it cuts. So yeah.
And then up in the air, Thornburg, they break the bathroom door open, and then Holly tases him, and he looks dead because his eyes are open and he's just not moving.
Yeah.
I
don't know what happens when you get stunned as that. I mean, do you just can't
turns out blink? He's not dead, but he looks like
Holly just killed a man. Holy shit. I mean, you know.
And then Lorenzo and McClane get into a car to drive after the airplane. So now Lorenzo's actually being competent for the first time.
Yeah,
and then
way too late.
In the car with him is Vito, the first cop that was fucking with John. So that's like a joke,
right? Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say though, if you're gonna redeem Lorenzo, I mean, the point to do that was midway, and I think that happens with the guy.
Yeah, he's not redeemed. He's just less of a dick toward the end.
Yeah, because the guy above him, once that plane comes down, goes, okay, shit's real. And Lorenzo, almost to the bitter end, is the most incompetent fucking shitheel of all time. But he has a single moment at the end of the film. And I don't know if that's supposed to redeem him. I can't say it did in my book. But no. But he's at least on board now, finally, at the fucking end.
So now,
although I think they get into a traffic jam, so it doesn't even matter. If I remember, like he crashes his car, doesn't he? Yeah.
He crashes it through a fence or something.
Yeah, and then like he gets swarmed by like reporters and shit, so it doesn't even matter. Lorenzo's useless any fucking way, right as he's about to become useful.
Oh yeah, he gets on a helicopter. Okay, that's right. I
forgot with the news lady. I think it's a news helicopter.
The terrorists are taking off, and then Hawley's airplane has to land like right at the same time. Like it's all very close to each other, and he uses a helicopter to land on top of the plane, and then he's hanging out on a wing and tries to fuck with the fuel area and kind of opens that up for a second. He fights with Major Grant, and that doesn't end up well for Grant because Grant goes into the propellers and out the other
everything
side.
We brought, I can make loose connections to every tangent we've been on. It's like Raiders. He goes into the propellers. See, it's totally. So the Temple of Doom tangent means something.
It is very. I guess it is very. It is very Indiana Jones a little bit.
Before that though, he's just like, it's a shame, McClane. I was starting to like you, and he's like, I've got enough friends. I think the idea of that was like there are way more characters in Die Hard 2 that McClane kind of buddies with, you know, like you have Marvin the janitor, there's a lot of characters. So
Al was enough.
I think so too. I think it's almost too many in this one, but I think that was the idea of that line, because otherwise it's like, I don't know what I think of it. But yeah, so he ends up in the propellers. Then Sadler comes out with a big fucking like Bowie knife, and
they get in a fight, and McClane kind of loses that fight, but he's dangling off the wing and rips the fuel open and gets knocked off the plane. And then
so it's like leaking along the runway.
Exactly. And then he's on the runway, they're taking off, and just before they take off, says he takes a lighter, lights it, says yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, throws it. And then a big fire trail follows it all the way up to the wing, and it explodes, and the bad guys die.
I gotta say, it's my favorite yippee-ki-yay motherfucker of the franchise.
It
Personally,
is better than the original Yippee Ki motherfucker. You're right. That's the best Yippee Ki motherfucker.
I
It
think so.
definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, Live Free or Die Hard actually had a kind of a good one where he shoots himself through the. But no, this is the best yippee-ki-yay. So I think in Die Hard 2.
And that fire strip actually makes a great landing site for the planes,
Yeah.
which I don't know how they clean up the wreckage so quick. And I also don't know how they can, because it's still a big thing. Like airplanes take a while just to get off the runway, you know?
Right.
So it's still like a big thing. Like they can't all like just start landing one after another. They gotta know where they're going. But I don't know.
Right. They're desperate. Yeah, I thought that too. I'm like, I don't think they could just back to back start landing like that. I mean, but it makes a sort of sense. I mean, the landing strip kind of being highlighted. They're desperate. They're out of fuel. But yeah, back to back like that, I don't know. I mean, you kind of, I would think you'd almost have to start using your own judgment as far as getting out of other people's way really fucking quickly because everybody else is landing behind you. I don't know. But yeah, and then the runway is obviously obstructed by the fucking, well, at least 2 planes now that have blown up. So like you said, I mean, that's kind of a problem, but we'll roll with it, you know? So I mean, it looks awesome.
And then he's yelling for Holly. Holly's okay. Everything's good. And
it's kind of like the end scene of the first Die Hard, because doesn't he do that? Isn't he like walk? He's like, Holly, you know, when he's like all wounded like and shit, and he's trying to, yeah. So I think
and then just like the first movie, they remind you at the very end that, hey, this is a Christmas movie, people, and that's the end. So
yeah, I mean, he starts to embrace Holly. You have the news reporter woman covering it up, like let them have their moment. Holly says, "Why does this keep happening to us, John?" You know, because it's kind of highlighting what are the odds of this.
But yeah, so place in society, I mean, I guess you could kind of make it comparable to the first Die Hard, except for like just, you know, now it's just kind of more of like a brick on the wall rather than like the first Die Hard kind of broke a few like kind of like barriers
Action
and set some trends.
Yeah.
This one did seem a little bit of a copycat of not only itself, but also other movies, which isn't always a bad thing, but like, it just doesn't stand out quite as much as the first one or the third
I feel like my criticism though is because we have Die Hard 1. Like I guess if Die Hard 1 did not exist and I watched this, I think I view it a lot more favorably, you know. So it's a very solid sequel, but it is not Die Hard 1.
The villains aren't really as good in this one.
Being personalities, they're not as memorable. I mean,
yeah.
I guess what I was gonna say is as far as the extremity of what they're doing, it's more than the first Die Hard. Like this dude drops a plane out of the sky as a slap on the wrist. Basically, you know, like Hans might have shot a hostage and his plan was to kill all the hostages and drop the building on them at the end of the first Die Hard, you know, but there's like 30 people. Like this guy brings a fucking plane out of the sky, and that's just as a warning. So he's bigger in that way, but he's not as memorable as Hans. He doesn't have like the charisma that Alan Rickman, you know, brought to the character, and so he's a lot more forgettable. The villains are in this one. I think they corrected that with a vengeance by bringing in. I mean, who better to bring in than Jeremy Irons as a follow up to Alan Rickman? So they course corrected for that one, I think.
Before we get into ratings, what are some recommendations you have, Dakota?
Clear and Present Danger, but that's more of,
I'd say like Air Force One and then Indiana Jones.
The 90s became a lot more like their thrillers started to move more towards what you saw in the early 2000s, which was like the Bourne trilogy, you know, like you had Ronin and that was in the late 90s. I'm trying to think about the early 90s was kind of maybe a bit of an identity crisis. I think everything was kind of taking notes from Die Hard, maybe trying to be a bit more than the typical Schwarzenegger fare of the 80s, you know? So, but yeah, I can't really think. I mean, I don't know, Clear and Present Danger, just because I like the movie, but it's very different. It's probably not a great recommendation. The other Die Hard movies, you know, they're really all good except for a Good Day to Die Hard.
And then, all right, so out of 5 stars, Dakota, what rating are you going to give Die Hard 2, 1990.
Shit, sorry. Yeah, like so. Like I remember my original rating was 3.5, but I think it's a 4 for me,
Okay.
because I think I gave Die Hard 1 a 5 last time, right? So
I
if
think
that's
you
a 5,
gave it a
this is a
5,
4.
and I think I gave it a 4 or 4.5. I give Die Hard 2 3.5, mainly
That's okay.
because it's the best yippee-ki-yay motherfucker. The airport thing is like a very wider threat that actually seems like not out of the question. You know what I mean? Like so many times it's like a hero's got to save the fucking world. There are a lot of things that like just aren't as good or like are rehashed and just a little cheesy and whatnot, but like more
Yeah, I mean,
so
there
than the
was a
first
Lethal
one.
Weapon series going alongside this, and I can't
Oh yeah.
remember a lot of those.
Oh,
So
one thing I noticed is in the grandma's purse is a magazine with a Lethal Weapon on the cover.
is it okay? So we're like, I guess Die Hard and Lethal Weapon were probably competing at the time, sort of. I read kind of like a fun fact that was like, I think, what was it? It's like, I think Die Hard 3's script was going to be used for Lethal Weapon 4, but then it became Die Hard 3. So,
And the very last thing is this is technically our first episode of our
in
new
the new year.
season of season
Yes.
2. We're 1 year into doing this and it's been great.
Right.
So we would appreciate continued support from everyone that gives us shit. So hit the like button, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, check out on the podcast, wherever podcasts are found, on Apple or Google or Spotify. And if you're listening on one of those, check out our YouTube because we have some visual aids and some cool stuff on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
With that, I'm Nate. This is Dakota. We're the Spoiler Alert Podcast. Happy holidays, everybody.